You are now listening to the sound of sanity. This sound will continue for the duration of the program! Hello, welcome to Sound of Sanity. I am Nathan. I am your humble and obedient host. We've got Ben Sulzer. He is the P, who is a T of S.
That's right.
And why don't you introduce the OG?
He's the P who's going to make an acronym that will sound like something we don't mean. He's the pastor who's a master of sanity.
Who's the M of S? It's great. You almost fell into my trap. How you doing, boys?
Oh, just fine. How are you?
I'm doing well. Good. Time for another exciting episode of Sound of Sanity. Now, this episode begins with a terrible thing that's happened, which is emails and messages got lost in our Sanityville servers for months.
That is true, yeah.
And
for
so,
like 6 months or longer.
Yeah. So without going into what that is exactly, what I'm saying is people have tried to contact us through a forum, and they've
we got hundreds of emails all at once.
Yes.
That came through from like anywhere from yesterday to 6 months ago.
And some of them were like, thank you for doing this wonderful thing. And we're like, we don't remember what the wonderful thing is, but you're welcome. And some of them were like, that was so stupid what you said. And we're like, yeah, we said that 6 months ago. And some of them, were everything in between. Some of them were book orders. Anyway, it was a national tragedy that happened. But I want to address a certain email that got lost in the system, which is from our good friend, Justice.
What's up, Justice?
He's written to us before. He is a fan of our creative projects, such as Chip and Lance or The Ville, which if you like...
Yeah, I remember him. He's on a quest to locate Sanityville in real life.
Yes, he actually he actually figured out, because there's an episode where Ollie drives from The Ville to, I believe, Columbus, where Pastor Stu has set up shop. And so he figured out like the mileage of how far Ollie had gone and tried to reverse engineer a solution as to exactly where Sanityville is located. And here's the thing, Justice. We know the answer. I know the answer to where Sanityville. I know exactly where it is. But you will never figure it out, my friend. You can have your little cork boards and your strings and everything that you have. Mostly just cork board and string, I think. But you will never crack. We're too smart for you, man. We're one step ahead. You can't do it.
Nope.
You might think like a tantalizing little whiff of a clue is in your periphery, but you turn and it's not there. You'll never figure it out. But one thing that he will figure out, Justice asked, because he likes The Ville and Chip and Lance, which, by the way, if you don't know what those are creative storytelling. How would you describe these things? Both of them are spin-offs from this very show, which if you dig into the archives, you will find out used to have little comedy skits and stuff. Those characters developed into sort of fully fleshed three-dimensional characters and ended up generating two other shows, one of which is called The Ville, which is a serialized tragic comedy about the citizens of The Ville. And it's got an octopus, it's got an evil pastor, it's got all kinds of stuff.
Possums.
Yes. And then the other one is more of a friendly children's show called Chip and Lance. And how would you describe that show, gentlemen?
Oh, Chip and Lance is a really fun sort of fantasy kids show that has a hilarious guy named Chip in it. And a straight man named Lance who has to deal with his buddy's exasperating insanity. But it's charming insanity. It's heartwarming insanity. It's insanity with a moral point, I dare say.
The moral point, yeah. And there's also possums in that one.
There's possums in that one too. They're Chip's possums.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of them is named Disease Face.
That's right. He's the real hero of the show, if we're being honest.
Yeah. So these shows are both kind of like Adventures in Odyssey meets ... Chip and Lance is more like Adventures in Odyssey meets ... because it is in fact a children's show, but it's got adventure and bad guys and monsters and, everything that you'd want to have in your children's show. I mean, if you had to say something, I guess you'd say the last season was Chip and Lance meets Harry Potter. But
that's right.
That's the blank meets blank is a difficult formula to do well. So I don't want you to hold us to it. I don't want you to be like, Harry Potter's not nearly as good as this. I don't want to get all those complaints.
It's poor Rowling, she's been through enough.
Yeah,
She doesn't need her beloved little piece of IP compared to something like Chip and Lance.
Right. Somebody's children's refrigerator drawings don't need to be compared to the Mona Lisa. Come on. So that's Chip and Lance. That's the Ville, and they're both shows that we have a lot of fun doing. Justice is a fan of those shows, and I encourage you to listen to those shows if you have not listened to them, because you can be a fan of them too. But Justice was wondering about our creative process, and so I thought we could do a fun little episode where we talked about the creative process, which sounded a lot more appealing to me than writing a long email describing in words our creative process. I thought verbal words would be a nice way. So, guys, what is our creative process for writing an hour-long comedy drama kind of show, or a half an hour-long children's Adventures in Odyssey type thing?
Well, when it comes to the Ville, we have to reverse engineer quite a bit of it, right? So we have to figure out where we want to head in the season. We need to always keep in mind, we start with where we want the show to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to reverse engineer that to where we want this season to go. And then once we have that, and we can always throw on the board, well, we definitely want this to happen.
Right.
No matter what. Because that would just be, this is just a really fun idea or exciting idea or something that makes sense for this character. We want to see this happen for this character. Okay, so that's got to be on the board too. And it sort of starts on that level, I think, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, where it's like, okay, we know a couple things about where we want to end, and we know a couple things we want to have happen along the way. So how do we make all of that work and structure a season that helps advance the story of Erica and Ricky and Chip
and
Lance and Pastor Stu, for that matter. And then once you get into, so then you can have, but even there, like, okay, that's where it is now, but that's not how it started. So it is an evolving process too. But season 2, season 3, and now season 4 is mapped out. We know what
we're going into season 3. Aren't we?
I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, I was thinking
it was a long
we had
spread.
season 2A and season 2B.
Yeah, we could call it season 4, and perhaps we should. But
anyhow, season 2 was mapped out ahead of time, and the episodes all had a progression and a logic. And in the writing of it, it ended up changing quite a bit because you get into things and it's like, okay, well, your ideas and your plans, they made sense before you got started writing. But then in the process of writing, you're dealing with characters, and characters tend to have sort of a mind of their own and work themselves out and leave the story in a different place than you thought.
I would say it feels like one of two things. Number one, it can have that kind of feeling of, oh, this character just doesn't want to do that. Like, she's doing something else right now. So I guess I have to change and go along with her. And you have to be sensitive to that when you're writing. You have to actually be alive enough to your own characters that
you can't force things because you want them that way. There's part of it that's discovery.
Right. There is that. There's also, you want to speak more mechanically and with less creative magic. You could say, well, I don't know how to make that play this way. So I thought I was going to be able to put these two characters in a room and they were going to get from point A to point B. But actually, as I try and write it, it's not working, which means I need to go from A to C over here in order to get back to B. And so what am I going to do? I guess that changes this here. And that's a lot of the process of just figuring these things out. I mean, I guess if we're breaking an episode, what we do is we have the general idea of what the episode, this is the episode where Bob goes to the store and gets gunned down by a terrorist. That's what we want. That's the story that we want to tell. And we know that much. And we've got a really great scene where Bob sacrifices himself to the terror. Like, we have a couple of ideas for.
We've got some great lines even for that scene where we know we want Bob's final words to be.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all part of, like, when we were hashing this out. We were hashing it out. Like, we know that we want Bob to pay off this thing that was said 2 episodes earlier with his final line as he goes to fall on the grenade and sacrifice himself.
Right.
Okay, so this is the scene we want to get to. This is the payoff. This is the climax. This is the catharsis. These are the emotional beats we want to hit. And the terrorist is the way to that.
Right.
At least so we think coming into the episode.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so then we have to think. So we have like a bunch of ideas for what's going to happen. But then we have to start asking all the kind of practical questions. Like, okay, Bob's going to go to the store. Like, we need him to be at the store when the terrorist attack happens. Why is Bob going to the store? What's dramatically interesting about Bob going to the store? What does it mean for the character that he would go to this store? Because what you don't want to do is just say, I'll figure that out when I'm writing it. Because what you'll find is you're stuck with a bunch of lifeless, dramatically inert crap that you can't make work because you're like, well,
there's no reason for Bob to be going to the store.
He wouldn't go to
the
the
only
store.
reason for Bob to be at the store is so that he can get blown up by a terrorist in a cathartic way.
Right. And the best piece of advice, I'd give 2 pieces of advice. Number 1, outline. You can always change it later, but it's good to have something to throw away. So I think a lot of young people, when they're trying to be creative, they just want to let the muse speak through them and they want to be creative and stuff like that. And that's fine, but it always helps to have a plan with anything that you're trying to do. And I like to have a very detailed plan, particularly because my brain doesn't work structurally. I think there's some people that are just naturally well structured in the way that they think, and so they don't need as much of a plan. But for me, it's like I can write the snatches of great dialogue or do the character beats, but it's like I'm going to get lost in what the story is and what it's actually about if I don't have a really solid roadmap as I go about actually writing the darn thing. So number 1 is to have a plan like A, B, C, D. Bob goes to the store. And the best piece of advice, number 2, about how to make that compelling is a piece of advice that I think has been spread most famously on the internet by the South Park guys doing a little talk where they talk about this. But it's an old piece of screenwriting advice, I think, maybe from Sid Field's famous screenwriting. I don't know where it originates. It's as old as the hills, ultimately. But the way to think about it is this. If the beats of your story are the individual things that happen. Bob's going to go to the store. He's going to have an encounter with the bag check lady. The terrorists are going to burst in. They're going to round everybody. You have these different beats. If you can put the word "and" in between those beats, Bob goes to the store and he buys groceries and terrorists come. Then you have a dramatically lifeless scene. If you can put the words "but" or "therefore," if you can establish dramatic causality, then you have a story. I went to the store is not a story. I ran out of milk, therefore I went to the store, but terrorists attacked. That's a story.
It's the grammar of scenes.
That's a grammar of how you put of scenes and how you put them together, and even of the internal logic of the conflict in the individual scenes. He wants to buy milk, but the bag check lady is not being helpful. Is that's a scene. He wants to buy milk and the bag check lady tells him where to buy milk. Okay, why am I watching this? But and therefore always intrinsically answer the question of why you're listening to this, why you're watching this, why you're reading this.
Because but and therefore indicate conflict.
Right.
Right. They indicate tension of some kind. They indicate alternatives.
Right. And drama is about conflict, as we know, that goes all the way back to Aristotle's Poetics and the Greeks. And like that's story is conflict and conflict is story. You can't just tell a story about, and this is, if you've ever talked to someone who's a boring storyteller, it's because their stories lack conflict. They're like, I went to the store and I got some flour. And what store was it? It was Schnucks. And you're like, why are you telling me this? Well, they're telling you this because they're a narcissist and they think everything that happens to them is intrinsically interesting.
Yep.
But actually somebody who loves you and cares about your interest level is only going to tell you stories that have intrinsic interest. And that intrinsic interest is going to come from conflict and from buts and from therefores. Like, I went to the store, but we were attacked by terrorists. That would be a really, really interesting story.
And this is why, like, when you see like the dramatic comedic interpretations of kids telling stories, they're all strung together actually with ands.
Mm-hmm. And
I went to the mall and this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and now I'm reaching for something else about me. But that's how it's told.
Yeah, and at a certain point, if you love your kids, when they get old enough, you actually tell them, like, that's uninteresting. Like there has to be a point, and there has to be a conflict to this story. And if you can add a little dialogue, then it'll be an even better anecdote. And a punchline. A punchline goes a long way. Young 3-year-old kid that I'm helping right now. But that's what you want in an outline. You want a string of causality. Now it's complicated because you'll have multiple characters bouncing off of each other. It's not always going to be Luke Skywalker goes here and then he does this but generally you're going to have one main protagonist and they need to have a series of challenges. And I know there's people listening who are like, man, this is the most boring advice ever. Like this just feels so obvious and so easy. It's the most difficult thing in the world. It's where it's where you will spend all your time if you're wise, and it's where you should spend all your time. Because if you can build a good engine, then you can get all the way to the end of the story and it will carry you there. If you don't have a good engine, then it doesn't matter how good the air conditioning is and how well the windows work. And in other words, story is king. If you're not telling an interesting story, it doesn't matter how good the dialogue is. It doesn't matter how good the character beats are. It doesn't matter how observant you are about human nature. It doesn't matter how beautiful your dialogue or your prose or whatever.
How funny your jokes are.
How funny. People won't care. And you'll notice this. Like, think about your favorite comedies. They have plots. Why do they have plots? That's because plots actually carry you through and maintain your interests. I mean, does it really matter? Don't you just want to see Bill Murray being a cut up? Does it really matter whether Gozer's going to come this way?
Whether Weird Al's going to be able to buy that TV station after all?
Right. So a lot of times they'll have very stupid, obvious plots, but you have to have something to hang the jokes on.
And even a good stand-up routine actually has a plot. It has a structure. It has its own setups and payoffs. How many good stand-up routines have you watched where the final punchline is actually a payoff of something that was set up by other jokes
like an hour ago
that they made you forget about until they pulled it all together at the end, right? There's real structure, and that structure is a plot-oriented structure. It may not be a story, but it is a plot-oriented structure with a beginning, a middle, and an end, set up, climax, payoff.
Right. And if people are comedy nerds, which I don't know how many people that are comedy nerds actually listen to our podcast, but they might be thinking, what about Dangerfield? I don't get respect. He tells a bunch of jokes. What about Stephen Wright? What about people who just tell jokes with no connective tissue? Well, the thing about those people is there's about 3 of them that have ever existed, and they're geniuses.
And they exist in a context where part of the joke is the way they upset your expectations set by...
Right.
Like Stephen Wright's a great example of, like, he exists as an insane genius in a context that allows him to exist and be hilarious.
And that's also accepting the premise, which I don't think we actually do, that Stephen Wright isn't structuring his routine. Of course he is. Of course his jokes, you might not be able to exactly figure out what the build is, but he's probably worried a great deal about the order that they go in, where the big laughs are placed, the way that certain ideas build on other sorts of ideas. Like, he's actually not just pulling a bunch of 3x5s out of filing cabinet and just reading them in any given order. And neither is a Dangerfield. Neither are any of those old hacky, take my wife please joke comedians. They've all got a rhythm of a build. Sometimes when it's done well, when it's done artfully, it's almost invisible. And that's part of what you want. You actually don't want people to be thinking about plot. Oh, that's an interesting plot. If people are thinking that, it's probably because you're boring and stupid.
That's right. They have the same sort of stagecraft that a good magician has, right? Like, they're really good at the sleight of hand. They're really good at misdirection. They're really good at leading you down one path or while making you think you're going down another.
Right. You probably watched a movie, if you've watched enough movies where you see the stagecraft, you're like, oh, Mel Gibson is showing that he can get out of a straitjacket because at some point later, the bad guys are definitely going to... James Bond is the ultimate offender of this. Like, well, 007, here's your 3 gadgets that do this. And it's like, gee,
it's really random, but it's possible it may come in handy.
Yeah, gee, I wonder if he's going to have an exact use for an acid pen or a... and that's also part of the fun, is James Bond is doing it with a wink. Like, of course he's going to have a use for an acid pen.
What's it going to be, though?
What's it going to be?
Hitchcock's bomb under the table.
Yeah.
He's got that acid pin in his pocket.
That can be done artfully as well.
Yeah,
right. When it's done well, it both fulfills and subverts your expectations. Like, people probably know the phrase Chekhov's gun. Chekhov, the playwright, said, or at least famously was reputed to say, if you have a gun on the mantelpiece in Act 1, it should go off by Act 3. And that's true. You don't want to have the gun not go off, but who and how and when it goes off should all be a surprise. And that's part of the art, and that's part of the fun. And that's really where you want to spend a bunch of your time. So I think if anyone was interested in our humble little creative process, they might be shocked by how much of it is that kind of, well, what order does this go in? And if she does this here, then why would he do this here? And just getting that stuff right.
And then coming out with, oh, we thought that this had a logic and made character sense, but I don't actually believe that that's...
Like, Bob would not go to the store right now.
Yeah,
he's not the kind of character
I don't really think that Bob would do that.
He's obviously just going to the store because we need him to run into the terrorists, and you can feel it.
We put it all together. We made it all sort of, put all the elbow grease into trying to make it all make sense, have the scenes and everything put together, and then you step back and you're like, I don't actually believe that he even went to the store. I don't believe it.
What's an example? Can we pull an example of a scene that...
Like from our stuff or from...
that we've
I'm
actually
sure there's some
done
easy
that
ones.
too?
Yeah,
or,
just trashed, like...
I mean, we've trashed so much.
We've trashed whole storylines.
I know, we have.
Well, what's an example? It happens all the time.
Yeah.
It's like hard to picture.
Yep.
Maybe if we went through, I mean, we could probably just pick any episode.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we went back in our minds to that episode, we could probably come up with any number of examples of...
I'll give you the perfect example. It's the biggest example it's the thing that kickstarted our whole show, actually.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go.
So the episode Someone Special, which is the premiere, the first episode of The Ville, is an episode about a young lady being seduced by a very evil youth pastor. It sounds like a barrel of laughs, huh? It is. It's good. You should listen to it. But the thing about it was we were not interested in having her actually lose her virtue through 3 or 4 drafts of the script. The hero showed up at the end and gave the pastor a good tongue lashing. And
well, even the point of that episode, so the way that whole thing worked is we would have different style episodes. And when we had an episode where we just wanted to teach about something or talk about something that wasn't like in the news, we would develop a story about it. And this one was actually supposed to be about death.
Dealing with grief and stuff.
And grief, right? But we had already, with these little parody characters, we had written big backstories for all of them, and we knew their relationships to each other. And we had all kinds of cheat sheets and stuff like that. So the Popcorn Coalition existed in a bubble because it was a great way to mock the Gospel Coalition and their take on movies. But, Ricky, we always knew was being creeped on by Pastor Stu.
Right.
And that was just part of it. And we just wanted to have, if we were going to have any kind of characters, even parody characters, we wanted to develop enough about them of interest so that we felt like they could be distinguishable instead of all just kind of becoming the same thing or taking on the same kind of voice. Rapid fire characters, Chip Lance and Stone Huntington, were just 3 guys.
Just a kind of a Rush Limbaugh parody to start with. But then they had their own backstories too. And so when it came to, in this episode, Ricky's grandfather died, and we're going to do an episode about dealing with grief. And it just took on a life of its own with the youth pastor showing up to take advantage of the situation. Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to keep it about grief when we wanted to keep it so that Ricky stayed safe.
Mm-hmm.
But
I mean, I don't think it even crossed our minds. It's just like, well, of course, we're not going to have our character end up getting seduced at the end. Like, that's just, how could we do that? But we wrote several drafts of the script. I think we even had people in to record the whole episode.
Yeah,
I'm actually remembering now.
Yeah,
because we recorded the dumb.
We recorded the whole episode. We got done. You left for something.
Yeah, that's right.
And Nathan and I sat there and we're just like,
this ending sucks. It's not working.
It's not right. This is not right. And we looked at each other.
Well, first we beat our heads against, as you do, how can we set this girl actually doesn't seem that great. Like, we like her. We want her to survive this ordeal, but it really feels like she'd give herself to the youth pastor, given everything that we have to work with. So how do we make it inevitable that she doesn't? And we beat our heads against it forever. And then it both came to us at the same time. We looked at each other like, oh, of course.
She's got to go home with him.
She doesn't. She
just doesn't. That's just not who she is up until this point and how this all works out. She goes home with him.
And let's not pretend like Pastor Stu's a nobody either. We can't neuter him. Like he's a powerful villain. And then
we had like a story that had no resolution. It was like, okay, well, I guess we got to finish this story and keep working it out. And
right.
So, but then we also were like, okay, we're working with, like, part of why Ricky had to go home with Stu is because we're working with a whole world of backstory that nobody in our audience is working with.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, okay, how do we construct enough context to help everybody understand all the pieces on the table and how they relate to one another? Because we knew that Chip and Erica were brother and sister. And we knew that Ricky was Erica's daughter. And we knew that all this other stuff, right? And we knew why Chip was obsessed with gold and kind of like busted up and broken. And we knew that there's a whole reality to Pastor Stu that ran deep. How do we set all that up? And also in a way that makes it fun and exciting and cool. And that basically leads to, that wild second episode with the Seven Arms plot line and everything. That's basically the big flashback setup that kind of puts a whole bunch of pieces on the table that we were working with, that the audience wasn't working with, that was going to help us propel and tell the story we wanted to tell.
Well, and it also, that's an example. So there's an example of us trying to make something fit, having it all set, and then realizing this doesn't work. It's not inevitable. We have to rewrite. We have to change. I can then give you an example of having something that you're aiming towards and it ends up working. At a certain point soon thereafter, what snapped into focus was that this was a two-hander between Erica and Pastor Stu. Like that was basically the story. And Erica is a complicated character. I don't think she's ultimately a monster, although only time will tell. But for the first season, at least, it was basically going to come down to a monster fight. You have a woman who's been so broken that she's a monster in her own way. And then you have a real monster in Pastor Stu. And it's just who's going to win. And they're on a collision course. And that's...
Well, when Erica Rosebloom says jump, the world says how high.
Right. And she never loses. And so Pastor Stu has picked the wrong fight.
Finally.
And so he's going to get his comeback. But so we know all that. We know that's how the last episode's going to end. We have some ideas about how that's going to work, but then we have to find our way there. We have to make it feel inevitable. We have to explain all this stuff, lay all this pipe. Then you just begin to figure things out and lay them in. And so it's a lot of engineering. There's a lot of construction work that goes into it. But then there's wonderful surprises where the characters do, I mean, I don't want to be cheesy in the way I talk about it, but where they do, as you're writing them, develop hidden depths and the thing that really set, I think, season 2 and then into season 3 and everything that we're doing now in motion was the end of the Christmas episode. And I think we had some conception that this is where we were going, but I just had ended up writing a scene where Erica's won. Pastor Stu has been banished. She's gotten everything she wants. And then nobody wants to spend Christmas with her because they don't actually like her. And the only reason that she's gotten what she wants is because she made herself into a monster, just like Pastor Stu. And she's only relied on her monster powers in order to defeat the other monster. But it turns out, nobody want to spend Christmas with a monster. And so you suddenly, I think we as authors suddenly have compassion, like, oh, this isn't just Pastor Stu's broken adversary. This is someone who's really hurting and really sad, and we'd like to see redeemed.
But we started in such a deep, dark hole that it's going to take a lot of work for her to climb out of that. And so how do we take the woman who is the Pinterest mom, mortification of pen, paper over everything, turn her son into a psychopath, turn her daughter into jailbait, turn her husband into an impotent wuss, just kind of on the strength of her forceful compensation for her own childhood brokenness and trauma.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get from there to any kind of redemption?
Right. And what is, again, I don't want to sound corny, but you start to ask yourself questions like, what can that redemption really look like?
What are going to be the drivers of that?
What are the drivers? What are the costs? And what is the beauty? And what is good about this person? What is, let's actually understand this woman, this character, and see what motivates her, why she's built these walls, what was good, what was self-preservation, what's magnificent about everything that she's done, what's terrible. Like, let's just understand everything, and let's help our audience understand everything so that they can feel compassion for those people in their lives, or so that they can understand themselves better if they happen to be one, or if they know one, or if they're married to one, or whatever. And so you just begin to ask all those questions, and you begin to try and let the characters and who they are and what you've already set up drive things. You also have to decide how benevolent of a god to this little universe you want to be. And every world,
sometimes it feels like the world's conspiring against you, and sometimes it feels like everything's going in your favor, and sometimes it feels like you make your own destiny. And
right. So you begin to plot that all out, and you have big picture ideas where it's going to go, and then things surprise you. I mean, think about really any kind of creative endeavor is that it is an interplay between what you plan and then what happens when you're actually, even just writing a novel, even if it's just me, like all by myself, no one else is part of the creative process. I'm still going to have discovery. I'm still going to, ended up writing that a lot different than I planned to write it, but that's exciting. And I like, this character did a thing here. So, but what's fun about doing this kind of thing, an audio drama is what we're doing, or a movie or any kind of collaborative thing, is it becomes about, the guy who plays Bob, he's really good at this kind of thing. And he's
really bad at this kind of thing.
Right. He's bad at this. He's good at that. We thought he was going to bring a lot of comic energy, and he does. But man, when you give him a tearful scene, he nails it. So let's lean into that. Let's build around, and sometimes it can be frustrating, like you're building around what people can't do. But we've been blessed to work with some great performers, and what you can actually do is be like, this person has an unexpected gift for this kind of thing, and so let's give them more of that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah. Your writing tends to, just like you would imagine with a screenplay, like first example that popped into my head, and this is a dopey one, but if Will Smith is originally cast as Neo, you're going to have a very different kind of matrix, because you're going to be writing, changing, and directing the scene to play to the strengths of Will Smith. So Neo becomes the kind of Neo that can be embodied and performed successfully by Will Smith.
Right.
Keanu Reeves is very different and going to give you a very different performance, and you try to get a Will Smith performance out of Keanu Reeves, and good luck, right? So it's just going to be very different. And so each of these characters, you have ideas in your head and you cast them. And then as you work hand in hand with the person who is playing the character, it just becomes that sort of,
it's a dance.
Yeah. It's a process of making it all work and shaping it. And sometimes you end up rewriting the whole season because of what characters can give you that you didn't expect, and that you were afraid to go there because you didn't want to stretch them, or what they can't give you that you thought you needed, and now you have to decide to go without.
Yeah, and the interplay between character and performer is interesting.
Yeah.
Because they limit each other or expand each other. What's the right word for that? In different ways.
Yeah.
But also, another thing just with juggling multiple characters and storylines is that you're like, well, we're going to do this with this storyline. And then you're like, this isn't as interesting as we thought. Like, this character was going to do all these things and have his own trajectory, but actually, it just feels like he's stealing time from what we actually care about. We didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah,
how did that happen?
You'd think that you know what you care about, but actually you have to do a lot of work to figure out what's actually, I mean, I don't know how to explain this because it's not intuitive. Like you'd think if you could sit down and answer any question, it's what interests me about this, but it's actually a pretty hard question to answer sometimes. I mean, there are things, obvious things that you're excited about, but then you'll be excited about something else over here. And then, you'll start to write it and you'll be like, well, that's like our grief thing. I mean, we really thought we were writing a grief episode, and it turns out we didn't care about writing a grief episode. We didn't have anything to say about grief.
But we had a lot to say about the Pastor Stews of this world,
right,
and a lot of personal experience with them that we were ready to just like deal with. And then we thought we put Pastor Stew to rest. And when the idea was broached of bringing him back and we all got excited about it, we had to...
I was like, oh, thank goodness, Pastor Stew.
Yeah, okay, wait. This feels like cheesy. It feels forced. It feels whatever. No, it doesn't. It feels like what we care about, actually. And it feels like we're not actually done with this part of the story. And it feels like there's more of this to tell, because there's a spark in our eyes now that we just didn't have when we were working the rest of this out.
That's right.
And so it's just like, okay, well, I guess we better lean into that and figure it out.
Pastor Stew's done, this other character is going to be the villain in season 2. How's he going to be the villain? Oh, like this or this. We don't care about this at all.
Oh my goodness. I mean, if you think about some of the ideas we had for where season 2 was going to go, it's pretty hilarious.
It did not go there.
And they will never see the light of day.
And thank God for that.
You want to come to Evansville and buy us a drink? Maybe we'll tell you, but we're not. Maybe if you're like sworn to secrecy.
It's not much fun.
No, it just wouldn't have been good.
Why would you care?
It just wouldn't have been good.
It would have been pretty boring.
I mean, it's vaguely exciting to hear like, well, this could have sucked. but yeah, I mean, my favorite characters personally tend to be the ones that, I mean, I have to feel like I have some observation of who this person is or some understanding or some connection point. But they also tend to be the people who I want to understand. I mean, Erica Rose Bloom is my favorite character we've ever done. And I love her. And that's because she's helped me, because I grew up with Erica Rose Blooms and I understood that there was a category of person who was an Erica Rose Bloom, but I never understood who that was or what was motivating them or where they were coming from. They just seemed,
what made them tick?
They just seemed scary. And so being able to understand her and have compassion for her, it's actually helped me in real life with real women to understand and to interact with them. And Pastor Stu has been very helpful. And we've actually had pastors thank us for writing Pastor Stu before as arch and over the top. I think we maybe even talked about this on this very podcast. I don't remember.
Even recently, maybe.
But as over the top and crazy and satanic as Pastor Stu is, we've had people be like, yeah, I had a moment where some hot young thing was asking me for pastoral advice, and I had Pastor Stu in my head, and I realized I'm capable of that. And so I said, we can't have coffee together or whatever it is. I protected myself. And those things are good. I think if you're going to write, it's not that you start with theme and build outward, but at some point midway through the process, a theme better emerge, something that you're actually interested in,
That's right.
Something that you want to understand about yourself, about human nature, about people.
You have to have something to say.
Right.
You just have to have something to say. And that's like when we talk about on our movies podcast about some of these, how many movies that are made today, it's like, is there a point of view? Mm-hmm. Do they have a thing to say? Is there anything that they actually care about? Or are they just stringing together scenes and expecting us to pay money for it?
Yes, Mission Impossible. Hello. We love it.
Yeah, that's why we don't go back to Mission Impossible, though. We do talk about this. This is why I prefer, even though the stunts are worse and everything, it's why I prefer Daniel Craig's Bond for all its existential lameness and stuff, because they have a perspective on the character of James Bond. They have something that they want to say about this pop culture icon of the last 50 years and something that they want to say about who he is. And that's just much more interesting to engage with than Ethan Hunt. He's a guy that runs and dodges explosions and stuff like that.
Hangs on the side of airplanes.
Yeah, that's
flies
cool.
His own helicopters.
That's cool exactly once. I mean, Mission Impossible 4.
He's really good at riding motorcycles.
He's very good at it.
For a 60-year-old man.
Yeah, and when he was 40, he could do it with white doves flying behind him. But he's lost that ability.
Those days are gone.
So creative process, I just can't emphasize. I mean, the main point I want to make is you plan, you prepare, you outline, you get your story in as good a shape as you possibly can. And then you write a draft and you're like, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. You got to get some perspective, like give it a little time to rest.
And then you need as much help as you can get too. And I think, I'm sorry to interrupt the flow there. 'Cause I think that if we look back at how we started versus how we work now, and we've gotten a lot more efficient. And a lot of that efficiency is we're not all trying to do all the same things. Right. So at the beginning, we were breaking up the scenes. We were each writing scenes, and then they had to be blended together. And so we were each a part of each aspect of the process. And now that's less true than it was.
Well, the big time that we did that, what ended up happening is that one of us had to go through and just rewrite everything so that it was cohesive. Like we all wrote scenes and it was good. I mean, it is an okay way to work. But at the end of the day,
we've done that a couple of different times, I think. But,
But
it ends up making almost double work in that sense.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah. I mean, now one person will write a draft and then we'll all look at it and other people can give notes and perspective and have things hit them cold, which is nice. Like, I haven't engaged. I knew the outline, but I haven't really engaged with this before. So
which is basically my job at this point, is to help break the episodes and figure out where we want to go and figure out structure, how things are going to work, and maybe have some good lines or whatever that I come up with for somebody to say, or payoffs or whatever. I'm decent at holding some of that in my head.
Yeah, well, and a lot of that is actually in the outlining because we'll really write a lot of these scenes in detail, even as we hash out and that's when Jake can be like, well, he should say this beautiful line, or this should be the closer, or this should, we should set this up over here so that,
that's about the level of my work on the front end. And then it usually goes to Nathan ends up writing most of the scenes, the first draft of the script. And Ben's a part of that initial planning process too. And usually what as much as anything he brings to the table, he brings some of everything to the table, but he also always brings in that outside creative, crazy idea of the 7-armed octopus or the other fun thing that we're going to throw into the mix. I don't know if that's...
Was that Nathan's?
No, 7 Arms. 7 Arms was 7 Arms was Jake stepped out of the room, and when he came back,
that's right. Half the way it works is I step out of the room for one reason or another to take a phone call, and I come back, and now there's a 7-armed octopus.
Yeah, me and Ben like to riff and come up with crazy things, and I think a lot of the last season of Chip and Lance was just we broadly outlined it with Jake, and then me and Ben just hit the ball back and forth, coming up with whatever,
including fixing structure problems. I'm like, this concluding episode doesn't work. We can't get there.
I mean, one thing that's probably worth people knowing if they don't, Jake's full-time pastor of Church of the King, so he comes in for 1 day a week and can help us solve structure problems, and then the rest of the week he's doing other things, which is great. Me and Ben both work more full-time days for Warhorn, so we have more time to. I mean, I would love it.
It's in a lot of, if I come in, it's like, okay, let's work through this script together. And I'm often the one that's like, yeah, I don't believe that. Or, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And that's where the other big thing that you have got to have some thick skin and some humility if you're going to do this, particularly collaborative. I think it would be, if I can pat me and Ben on the shoulders, here's an easy thing that we could do. Well, Jake's not around for the process, so he doesn't understand how much work we put into building this thing. He's just, well, guys, that didn't really work.
Yeah, he shows up after we've poured hours into this and just like, I don't get it.
Yeah,
I don't believe
take a bucket of your sweat and just throw it down the drain, which I guess is what you should do with our sweat.
Yeah, you probably so.
We're like, we sweat all that sweat. We bled all that blood. But no, you have to, I mean, there might be a time to say, well, Jake, actually, let us help you understand what we're doing so we can do it better. There's also time to just say, well, precisely because he doesn't have as much invested right now, he can have the perspective of the average listener or the person that's going to come to this cold and can help us get this in good shape. And you need that. You need as much of that as possible. You need to be able to see it from the point of view of the average person. You need to be able to see it from the point of view of the dumb person and decide how much you're going to make sure they understand it, which might not be all. I mean, there's a place to say, nah, we're okay going over some people's heads. You need to also understand it from the point of view of the snob and of the critic and you need to be able to bring all those kinds of additional perspectives to it.
And then make your choices.
Right.
Right.
Like,
So
I'm okay if this goes over some people's heads. I'm okay if this is, do I want to be the favorite? Do I want this to be the favorite moment of some people, or do I want it to be the okay moment for everybody? Those are the kinds of choices.
the favorite moment of some people, the most hated moment of others,
Right.
or the okayest moment for everyone.
Right. And then there's times to make all those decisions. I think you are a hack if you don't make some choices that are, well, I just want to do it because I know 3 people and me will love it. You should make some decisions like that. You're also a different kind of hack, a narcissistic artist hack, if those are the only choices you make. Like, I don't care about the audience. I don't care about regular people. I just want to do something that I think is cool. That's just called being selfish. So that's why you need collaborators, so that you can, I mean, even if you are a novelist, you need somebody at some point to read your novel and be like, well, that didn't make sense, or I could see why that was entertaining to you, but it's not entertaining for me to actually read it. Or I see where you were dealing with your demons, but it turns out most people actually don't have those demons. So you either need to make sure that they understand where you're coming from and can connect it, or you need to cut this part out.
I understand why you got bored with this and thought this was stupid, but actually it's hilarious, and you just lived with it for too long.
Yeah.
Or actually, just because it seems obvious to you doesn't mean it's obvious to everybody. That was really insightful.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the kinds of things that are so hard to self-gauge. If you've been living with the material for a while, or if you've been deep into the material, it's really hard to have a perfect perspective on it. So you need other people. So you write a big outline, you make it as good as you possibly can, you make it as well constructed, you have setups, you have payoffs, you have character motivation, you have causality, you have but and therefore, you don't have and. You are not done with this outline until you think it's the best outline, until you think it's, now obviously you're always working under time and you have to compromise. So I'm not actually saying this, I'm being a little hyperbolic, but hear me when I say you don't put this outline away. You don't move to the next step until you think you've got a really solid outline. I've talked about this 1,000 times on various podcasts, but what you do not want to do is make what I call the Wodehouse problem, because P.G. Wodehouse, the British comedic author, said where you always get yourself into trouble is when you're writing a scene and you think, I'm such a genius that I can just do that scene and it'll be great. And so you don't actually put the legwork in of figuring out what makes the scene great, even if a non-genius writes it. And that's what you want. You want an outline that's so good that even if the dialogue's bad, even if the execution's bad, the story is still so solid that it'll basically work. That's always the dream. You're not going to get there if you're working under a deadline, if you're working with real people's schedules, if you're working with real expectations. You're never going to actually be completely satisfied. But you want as much of it to just feel like, well, even if I did the bad version of this,
people would still love it.
People would still love it.
It would still work. It would still be okay. It'd still get the job done.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say some of our script outlines have felt more like that. There have been certain...
And there are levels to that too, right? Because when you're working with an audio drama, there's the story's got to work no matter what. And then there's okay, well, we know the story works, but now we need the dialogue to work independent of a performance.
Right.
Right. Because there's this would work if we just got all of our actors to perform the heck out of it perfectly in the most genius way possible. Mm-hmm. Well, that's another place where you're depending on just being a genius or having a genius in the room. And you want to take that out of the equation as much as you can too. So you want to write out everything so that at every step along the way, you're trying to idiot proof everything. So it can work if you have the world's worst actor performing it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I will confess that I do sometimes write some things specifically with the character of Chip where I'm just like, that's not that great, but Ben's going to make that hilarious. Because Ben is so in tune with how to make that character funny that I can feed him garbage and he'll make it into gold.
Even then, like what you're doing is you're leaning into, you have an idiot-proof situation.
Right.
Right. Like if you try to idiot-proof all your jokes, then you take away too much and you have great comedic actors. There's a balance there. You have to give them freedom to actually make.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I want to, it's fun sometimes. It's like, yeah, if we need to have a backup, we can write something funny. But what we actually want to do is give Ben a challenge, like you're funny at doing a certain sort of thing, so here's like a certain sort of thing you could do, and just see what he comes up with. And then if it sucks, we can always
write something funny.
Yeah. Yeah, so you have to know your performers and know what you can throw at them and what they're good at and what they're bad at. And everybody has strengths and weaknesses and ways that they like to work and certain sorts of things that they feel happy and flattered to be asked to do, and certain sort of things that they resent having to do. Like, everybody's a different person. And so you got to figure that out. I mean, I guess I will say there is a time and a place for not outlining as much, but I think it's because you've outlined everything you can, and then you're like, well, the only way I can even get into this scene, I guess what I'm thinking of, if people know our shows, if they listen to the Ville, is like one of the best outlined episodes, in my humble opinion, is Brady Hawkins Day, which is this massive situation with all these characters bouncing off of each other, interlocking scenes. Chip is flirting with Claire. Erica and Matt are having a meltdown. Ricky's hand, there's all these different things happening, and it all builds to this.
Why is the Halloween stuff or Valentine's Day stuff all out?
Right. Yeah. There's all these moving parts.
Stuff out. Somebody's upset about this. Erica's got to do this. It's all got character purposes over here and over there. But actually, what we really want is for Chip to come flying in.
Right.
On a drag line, dressed as Cupid, and shooting Travis bombs.
Shooting arrows at our... So you start with like, here's something funny I want Chip to do, and then you try and reverse engineer it so that it feels inevitable, so that people don't see where you're planting little pieces. Can I get away with this? Does it make sense that the school
Cupids aren't scary?
Yeah, this girl's scared of Cupid for some reason, and that has to feel in and of itself like it's its own funny little beat. And that was one of the more fun and one of the more successful, I think, versions of that sort of thing. There's also been episodes like, I think of the Thanksgiving episode, whatever that one's called.
Can't remember.
Can't either.
Or My Dinner with Erica is probably the best example. My Dinner with Erica is an interesting example because there's a lot of interlocking parts, and we've thoroughly outlined Ollie's going to be having a conversation with his mom over here, which is going to interact with Chip and Lance doing a thing over here. And it's all going to interact with the main thing, which is Erica and Ricky trying to work towards some kinds of mending of their relationship. And then it's all going to fall to pieces because this and that and the third. And so we have all those things mapped out. But then you have the centerpiece, which is a conversation between Erica and Ricky. And that's a little harder to map out. I think in a perfect world, you do actually have it mapped out. But for something like that, sometimes
you just start writing it. See what the characters do. Yeah.
But it's controlled. If you're taking that kind of risk, you're controlling for it as much as possible by having everything around them as outlined and fenced in and in black and white. Like, I know I have to get to here, and I know that's what's coming, and I know that that's going to have its own intrinsic. And so because I've done all the legwork of building, again, a good engine, I can take it for a dangerous drive. I can see like, okay, what's going to happen? And sometimes you waste a bunch of time because it's like, well, I tried to get into that scene and write those two characters, and I don't know how to make it work. They're just talking about nonsense, and we're not getting in anywhere. But hopefully, if you've done your homework and you've worked everything else out, you can leave yourself a little latitude and then be successful in filling in the details. But you just don't want to be proud and rely on yourself as much as possible. You don't want to be like, well, I'm just going to do the genius version.
Well, and then even then, you're going to miss out on all kinds of opportunities to lay in and set up other things because you're going to get wrapped up in your flow. And you're going to miss the fact that you were wanting and needing to plant all the symptoms of ovarian cancer and some kind of internal knowledge that my time may be limited building up inside of Erica. Like, that's another thing that you want to have there.
Right.
But you're not going to have that there, and you're not going to find a way to work it in if you're just going to genius your way through it without some kind of pre-planning and outlining and structure that says, no, remember, we've got a bigger story we're telling and not just this one story here. So we have to be able to always step back and see that big picture. And then sometimes you have that plan for that sort of thing to lay that sort of thing in. And it's like, well, the scene itself has to work, and we can't force these details in.
What I will find also, I don't think you can ever plan too much though, because what I find is, let's say that I'm giving a speech, and let's say, or let's say I'm going to be publicly performing or something like that. Let's say I want to be hilarious. What I do is I write the best jokes possible. Or let's say we're going into a podcast and I want the podcast to be funny. Maybe I have in mind, like, these are 3 punchlines we could work towards. Inevitably, if I plan those 3 punchlines, I never use them. But because I have the confidence of knowing that they're there, I can riff and suddenly I'm 10 times funnier. Or I have a great outline for a talk and it's going to be profound. And because I know it's there, I can take risks and be calculated and be profound.
That's right.
But and a lot of times I'll end up throwing away the outline or throwing away the prep. But the trick is you then think, well, I didn't need the prep. And
this prep is exactly what gave you the freedom.
Right. The prep is what gave you the freedom. And so it's the same thing with this kind of stuff. You may find yourself like suddenly the fuse is lit and everything's burning hot and you're like, this is great. And it's just taking you to a place where you never knew you were going to get. And it's just so much more exciting and interesting and going in a great direction where these characters just feel like they're writing their own dialogue and stuff like that. That does happen. And you end up throwing away your outline. But it only happens because you have an outline. If you never had the outline to start with, then you never would have gotten to the part where you felt the muse just take over and start working through your fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we say this all the time, and people who are longtime listeners have heard us say it in a million places in a million ways, but you cannot be a lazy narcissist that relies on inspiration. If you're going to be an artist, I think you have to work twice as hard as somebody that's going to work on anything else, because you're choosing a profession that is famous for its lazy, drunken idiots and that attracts lazy, drunken idiots. So you better be prepared to prove that you're not a lazy, drunken idiot by working twice as hard as people who aren't artists.
Inspiration is for amateurs.
Inspiration is for amateurs. Who said that? Is that Stephen King?
Stephen King, for sure.
It really is. But that doesn't mean inspiration doesn't come. It just, I wish I could think of
hard work.
It comes through hard work. I wish I could think of a good example of this from our stuff off the top of my head. But I just know there's been a million times where we've beat our heads up against something again and put so much work into it. And then suddenly we're like, we should do this. And it sounds great. And we throw away all the work. And you're tempted at that point to be like, why didn't we just come to the good idea first? But the only reason you ever got the good idea was because you beat your head and went in a completely different
It's tempting to look at all that and say that, oh man, that was wasted work. But no, it wasn't. No work is wasted in the creative process. It's all one step closer to realizing the thing that you're trying to create. And that's part of the frustration of it, but it's part of the beauty of it too. It's like, it all matters. It really does all matter. And like you said, the same is true in your sermon prep or anything like that, right? There's just so much that you do that you end up throwing away or not having any use for. And that was all just necessary to get to what you needed to do.
Right. And it is such a high when the muses speak and it just takes off and it's great. But you really have to work towards it, and you have to have the faith to do the work when you're feeling tired or when you're feeling, when you have writer's block. I just always think you'd end up having more mind melds with the muses if you're able to work through some of that stuff, because you never really know when the muse is going to speak. You never really know when inspiration is going to strike, but inspiration is not going to strike if you're just like, well, I have writer's block today, so I'm not going to do anything. But sometimes you have to do like 4 days of, well, this just felt completely mechanical. And I wish that I was a bricklayer instead of a writer, because writing sucks and my fingers are tired from typing and this is boring and stupid and no one's going to like it. And I think if you get defeated by those days, then you're not an artist. It's only the people that are able to actually, maybe there are a few people that are just geniuses and the muse always speaks, but I've never met one and I have my doubts.
I think there are plenty of people that are geniuses and the muse spoke once and then they sat around waiting for the muse and they just they did it and they sat around waiting for the muse to speak again and it never happened. So they never did anything else.
Yeah. Yep.
And never learned how to cultivate the genius that they had into something that was actually more productive than their one-off.
Right. And by the way, none of what I just said means don't find the time of day that works for you. Don't find the coffee shop that works for you. I actually think that kind of stuff is important. I don't think that it's precious to try and find the environment and the circumstances that get your creative juices. What I'm not saying is you just need to be able to sit down and be a genius. But
you do have to just be able to sit down and work hard in environments that are not ideal.
yeah, you're not always going to be able to get those stuff. You're not always going to feel it. You're just going to have bad days, and that's fine. That's part of the process.
A lot of what you said goes for writing sermons too.
Yeah.
You just have to do it. You have to find a structure. You have to figure out your points, and you have to figure out your transitions in a sermon, or you can't communicate to people. They won't be able to follow what you're saying. And a lot of that, sometimes that can feel like beating your head against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to beat your head for a while and, well, pray, of course, that God will help you.
Yeah. And then sometimes, wow, this is great. I know exactly what I want to say about this, and it's going to be so helpful. And then sometimes you do that and you go and deliver it, and it is just as good as you thought. Sometimes you do that and you go and deliver it, and it's total crap. Sometimes you put a bunch of very mechanical work in, you go and deliver it, and everybody's like, yay, thank you so much. You said exactly what I mean, it's just, this is just the process. You don't want to be romantic about it. So we write an outline. We spent a lot of time on it. I think we've already kind of talked about, there's not much to say about the actual process of writing. It's just the rewriting is writing. If that's not already clear from what we've said, you write a draft, you look at it, you see what's good, what's bad. Usually it all sucks, and then you change it. But rewriting, for me at least, is much easier than writing. So my personal, I don't know if this works for everybody, but my personal principle is just always write the terrible version, because as soon as you have the terrible version, be it a sermon, be it a script, be it a speech, be it anything, as soon as you have the terrible version, you can start turning the terrible version into the good version, which is a much easier process than just facing a horrifying blank page. So I don't know if you guys agree, but I hate the blank page and I want to fill it as quickly as possible.
I think I've just sort of evolved in that direction, maybe in part under your influence or the influence of just how we've worked on this show. I've gone from much more of, I think, just act, do, and rewrite, fix, omit, generate, delete kind of guy. So I think I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if I was going to, maybe we don't want to do this exercise. If I was going to characterize this, I'd say Ben's a tinkerer. Like he does a little bit, and then he does a little bit more, and then he thinks about it, and then he does a pass, and like I say, I'm like you got to get it out of my head. It doesn't matter if it's crap. Let's just vomit, and then let's go back and let's intentionally. Oh, that's terrible. Like there's embarrassing. There's stuff that I write that I would never show to you guys, who are the people, even more than my wife, who get to see get a vulnerable peek into my creative process. But there's stuff that's just so bad. But I'm just like, I hate that blank page. I want to conquer it, and then I want to go back. And then Jake, I think you like to be in the right coffee shop with the right music and have a little bit of inspiration and feel like you're going somewhere. Feel like it's something that you're excited about.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I don't think that you're bound by that. Like, oh no, I don't feel inspired, so I'm just going to be a lazy bum. I'm not accusing you of that.
Yeah, I will come up to the deadline and then elbow grease my way through.
Right.
But yeah, I think
you want to know why you're doing it and be able to answer that question for yourself.
And by the time I get down to sitting down and writing something, I tend to just have it all sort of mapped and figured. I know the why and I know the what and I know how I want it to go. And then it can just, it's been pre-written, a lot of it. And then I go and then it's done.
I rely on pre-processing. Like I rely on taking lots of handwritten notes, just get as many ideas as I can out.
Yeah.
Find anything that's at all interesting to me, find stuff I don't understand, and I find if I don't allow myself enough time, it can create a bottleneck, like a time bottleneck at the deadline, and I'm like, no, I'm staying up way too late. Stuff like that. So I try to learn my limits and work within them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing we can say prescriptively is learn your limits and work well within them.
Yeah.
Don't rely on inspiration too much, but
or other people's methods exactly
Right.
too much.
yeah, you just have to figure out.
You have to be willing to do the work of figuring out what works for you.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to, at the end of the day, I think speed in action, I think success favors speed in action,
Mhm.
doing
Mhm.
over talking and planning and preparing.
Mhm.
Then I think that's just a fact of life.
Yeah. Although I think with a story, plotting it out, getting a good outline is doing, and that's what people need to understand.
Well, yeah, there's a line in which that's true for sermons too, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it's probably a line in
But
which that's
there's
true for
some
any-
line.
Yeah.
There's
yeah.
some balance.
I mean, for me, the really fun part is cracking a story, like doing the tinkering of what's the structure going to be, how it's going to work. That's a lot of fun. And then I love fine tuning. I love going back and being like, well, that's a lame line. How can we make that punchy or memorable? How can we make that joke funny? Like that's just crack to me. I love that process so much. The process that I don't like as much and try to rush through as quickly as possible just to get it over with is all right, I've got the outline. Now I just need to write the first draft that I can then go and improve. I mean, that's always the place where I'm weakest, the place where I'm most impatient, the place where I'm like, all right, come on. And it's always nice if the muse will meet me there.
Mhm.
She doesn't always. I'd say most of the time she doesn't. But if she wants to come along and be like, I'm just going to speak through you and make this fun and have these characters all come to life and make it good, then that's really nice when that happens. And I can tell. I mean, if I listen to a Ville episode, I can tell where the muse was speaking and where the muse wasn't. But you got to be able to do the work without the muse. And I don't know that you can tell. Like, I think some of your favorite stuff might have been engineered completely mechanically. Some of the stuff that you're like, that seems perfunctory, may have felt like the muse was speaking. It's not always one-to-one, like the best scenes are the most exciting. Sometimes they are. It just depends. So, yeah, I don't know. That's the process. We write a script. We read it out loud together. We go through. We fine tune any story points. We rewrite things like this isn't working. We do several passes. I mean, we're always working against deadlines and things like that, but we want to spend as much time making it as good as possible. So you have a draft that's pretty good, and then you start looking for, well, is there anything else that can connect? Is there anything in Act 1 that actually was a setup that I can pay off later? Or is there anything that happens in Act 5 that I can just, I mean, modern word processing is so great, people. Like I can just scroll up and write in
a setup for this.
Right. The terrorist is like, we're only killing people with blue shirts. Hey, I can just scroll up and put George or Dave or whatever his name is in a blue shirt. This is an amazing story that we're coming up with, right? The muse is definitely speaking. Yeah. The terrorist hates blue shirts because, his mom used to beat him and she wore a blue shirt. So I'm going to put like a blue shirted woman. You can start to do stuff like that. And then the most fun thing is just getting the dialogue just right, coming up with lines that are good and are fun and are funny. And I suppose we could do a whole episode about that. Some things, folks, you got to pay for my seminar. So, or maybe you just have to be a genius. No, you want the tricks to a quick trick to dialogue. Here it is. People always want something, and you always have to understand what your character wants. And people don't say exactly what's on their mind. They don't say exactly what they want. But anytime someone opens their mouth to speak, it's because they want something from the situation. And so just know that, and you'll be able to begin to write good dialogue. That's the mechanic. That's the foundation behind it, is what do they want? And so you can write like, it's sure is hot out there. And what he means is, it's annoying that my wife keeps opening the screen door and going inside and outside, and the air conditioning bill is going up. But if you start to understand the connection between those two things, text and subtext, I guess, is another way to think about it. If you understand, most people want something when they open their mouth. That's, of course they do. We're driven by want. But they don't necessarily say what they want. They say other things. And you just begin to understand that, and you can begin to write dialogue and then listen to how people talk. Listen to the kinds of things people say, the kind of lies they tell themselves, the kind of lies that they tell other people, the way that they lie. I'd say 40% of all speech is lying. And so just listen to conversation. Go to the mall. I mean, if you really want to learn to write dialogue, just go be a people watcher somewhere. Just listen to how people talk, and you'll observe really fascinating things. So that's a quick dialogue primer. And yeah. So then we write our script. Then we record it. We've got a bunch of people. We sit around microphones. We speak into the microphones. We say things. We record it.
We record it multiple different ways often.
Yeah, we've been refining that process a lot and over the years, and I still think we could do better. I actually have ideas about how we will do our next session. Like one thing that we never take the time to do is do a read through with the actors before we put them on mic, and I think that might actually be good. What we're always afraid of is, what if they just knock it out of the park the first time? Why don't we just record that? But I think it might be nice to have the comfort of reading it out loud with each other and talking through the beats and explaining to people like what's going on here, or she's being sarcastic there, or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, we usually do it a couple times, get good takes.
But it is often the case, for better or worse, that you are hearing our actors processing our scripts in real time.
Yeah, which can be wonderful. The thing to understand about actors, I guess, is as long as we're talking about process, and I think this episode needs to be done soon, right, Jake?
Yeah.
The thing to understand about actors is they all have different cooking times. And so some people, you don't want to tell them anything because you want them to discover it. And they'll be, if it's an emotional scene, they'll be really emotional. Some people are just great that way. Some people need to do it 20 times and then suddenly it's fully baked. And there's just, one isn't better than the other, but you just have to know and figure out who you're working with. Some people need to talk it through, like, why is she doing this? They need to understand the psychology. Some people just need to understand, say it faster, say it slower, or this line's sarcastic. It's just, some people act internally, some people act externally, some people go from in out, some people go out in. All different kinds of people, all different kind of actors, all different kind of performers. And you just have to know your people and know how to get the best out of them. And patience and empathy is going to win the day. So you record a bunch of takes, and then you put them in your favorite audio software. You edit them all together. It's total crap, and you hate it. And you go back and you re-record some more stuff, and you rewrite some stuff then, and you put it all together, and you're like, well, this sucks. And then you rewrite 5 things. And you have the people in again, and they're irritated to have to come in again. And you're like, no, it's going to be great. We have this scene. Bob's buying cornflakes. And they're like, why does it matter? Who cares? No, it's genius. And like, okay, all right. I'm buying cornflakes. And you do that scene. And then Jake's like midnight. Jake's like, well, what if Bob was actually buying bran flakes? Wouldn't that tie everything together? And you're like, Jake, the episode's going out tomorrow. I don't know if we have time to do bran flakes, but yes,
I'm right.
Why didn't you think of that a month ago?
Well, I only come in one day a week.
Right. Like, okay, bran flakes it is. All right, come back. You do the bran flakes, and you put it all together. You're always cutting. You're always looking for what you can omit. You're looking for places where you've either, hopefully by this time you haven't underexplained everything. Hopefully you've worked out your story and your beats enough that everyone can understand who's listening to it, what's going on. But there's a lot of places where they'll actually be ahead of you, where you've actually dumbed it down too much. And so you actually work on speeding it up, that's obvious, or that's intuitive. We don't need that. And sometimes you'll lose great material that way, but you lose it because it's slowing things down.
It's in the way of the story.
Yeah, like this is a really fun scene, but we already know that about the character. We learned that 3 scenes ago. And so it's gone, it's toast, it's not driving things forward. And so you keep tinkering and you put it all together and you put it out to the adoring public. Accolades, awards, money. You got to beat beautiful women off with a stick. It all happens for you. You're a star, baby. And that is a creative process.
Yay. 100% accurate.
100% accurate.
Mm-hmm. From first to last.
But it all started because you took the time to put some elbow grease into your outline and into your revising and stuff like that. And you didn't get discouraged when it all felt like garbage. So, and because you had good taste to begin with, knew what you were aiming at, and because you had the humility to realize when you had not achieved that aim. So, anything else to say about the creative process, gentlemen?
I don't think so.
Not in this episode.
Not in this. Well, we'll come back and revise it. 1 o'clock this morning, Jake will be like, we should have said such and such. We should have talked about the bran flakes. Oh, crap. We'll redo it. Okay, Justice, go and do likewise. I hope that helps you. And if you want to help us, you go to patreon.com/Sound of Sanity. You make a donation. When a coin in the coffer clinks, happiness is linked. I don't know, Ben, what's our rhyme? What's our Tetzel rhyme for?
Do we have one?
No, we do not. This is creative. We're exemplifying the creative process.
No. But
see, I just wrote some crap, and now Ben's going to revise it into genius.
Yeah, it'll take me like 15 minutes, but I'll do it. So just wait, listener. Be patient.
When
a coin in the coffer.
When a coin in Patreon lands.
We add more content to our brand.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's great.
Genius. All right. Yeah. Patreon.com/Sound of Sanity. Until next time.
Stay sane.
That's the wrong music. Sorry, folks. Still the wrong music.